What's up, guys? This is Rob from Dubseed.com. We are a marketplace for stems, samples, and acapellas. I'm sitting here with a good friend of mine. I call him Alex. A lot of people know him as Bacosaurus. He actually, fun fact, was and still is the dude that wrote all of our legal contracts for Dubseed.com. So we're close friends.
Yes.
We're homies.
A lot is hanging on this friendship right now.
And if this gets fucked up, I will never see him again. So anyways, Alex, Bacosaurus, you got a cool track for us today. Do you want to tell us a bit about it, and then we'll listen to the track?
Yes.
Awesome.
So the track I'm going to talk about today is called Booty Killa, and it kind of came about in a funny way where I was messing around with all these different sounds and different songs and styles and everything. It got really burned out on trying to figure out what I wanted to make at the time. And so I just kind of made this track for the fun of it, quickly, almost out of frustration, but just to kind of mess around. And it just came out super natural and ended up doing pretty well. So I guess that's a lesson in and of itself, to kind of just stick with what comes natural, even though it's a cliche.
Cool.
Mm-hmm.
Let's take a listen.
Sure thing. Started a little past the intro here, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
Dirty beat, I love that. 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 Dirty beat, dirty beat.
I'm a booty killer. 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 I'm a booty killer.
Awesome. Very cool, man. So, where do you want to start? I know there's been
Sure.
multiple times I've come to your place and we've dug into your project files, so you know exactly how this works. Just
Yeah.
tell us some cool things.
Sure. Well, I usually start tracks off most of the time with percussion stuff. And so I'll kind of start with that. And even as simple as starting with the kick drum up here. And so on the kick drum, just super simple here. But one kind of thing for this kind of music in particular, like kind of tech housey sort of stuff, is that there's a lot of rhythmic layers interacting with each other, but you don't want things to bleed on top of one another.
Okay.
You know, it needs to be really crisp sounding. And so the kick is pretty short and just like a short punchy kick, because I wanted the bass line to be like the main focus here. But
And
the
how
kick,
did you create that punchy short kick?
I actually just used the Nicky Romero like kick plugin, but you can use, you know, any sort of kick. I use 909 kicks and stuff like that a lot
Yeah.
for tracks, and so just any really simple kick works. And one kind of funny thing is here, I just noticed this again as I was opening up the track. There's this little part here where I'd have to turn it way up, I think.
Yeah, I'm
T-
hearing that.
Even here very much, but what it is, it's just like a resampled kick, I think, with with a simple delay on it. And I think I got that idea in my head from watching, maybe it was like an interview with Cats and Dogs or something like
Yeah.
that. And I like what they do a lot. They were talking about just super subtle textures in the background
Right.
of the kick. And so I don't know if that even makes any difference on that track, but I just noticed that when I was opening it up again.
Yeah.
And so
And
From-
do you just have that click kind of sitting in the background, not worrying too much about what it could be clashing with or how it fits in the mix? You just
Yeah.
kind of let it do its thing back there?
it's super quiet in the mix on this
Yeah.
track, and so I don't know. I honestly don't know how much it does, but
Yeah,
it's
but
kind
why
of
not?
funny. Yeah, exactly. It's kind of funny to see. And so kind of like after starting with the kick,
Can we try listening to the click with the kick and see
Yeah.
if we remove it, if there's any type of difference?
Yeah, sure. Probably have to like crank it way up here, but yeah, I mean, it almost adds some like
Well, are
just
you...
like tiny vinyl scratching to the kick.
Interesting.
So there's without. And only with like headphones, if it's loud, you can hear like some little tiny kind of clicks and pops and stuff. So I don't know, but I think anything you can do to make it less mechanical sounding, you know, less like it's just a drum machine on 4/4, the better.
Right.
So that's just one of those little things, and there's usually little experiments I try with every track, and so that one was just like way in the background. But then I always move on to working with the rest of the percussion, and something kind of cool that took me a long time to run across in Ableton that I noticed I probably should do again is you can see I started the percussion here with it's labeled 909 over here.
Yeah.
And in Ableton Suite, if you search for 909 Classic under all, yeah. So you can find Kit 909 Classic, and that's built into Ableton Suite. And it's actually a really, really good starting point for just getting ideas down when you're working on any kind of house music.
Yeah.
It sounds good out of the box. It has like this processing already on it, stuff you can change really quickly. And so you can see what I ended up doing is some of these things are in the built-in 909 Classic kit, and then some of them I'd switched out with other samples later on.
Okay. Interesting. So you mess with the 909 kit just to get your ideas out
Yes.
there, and then you'll replace those sounds with
Yes.
sounds that you actually...
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Because I think it's super important to get your ideas down as quickly as possible,
Yeah.
like as quickly from your head into the computer as possible. So,
Right.
yeah, it looks like I did the 909 kit,
Yeah.
but then switched out later. Yeah, it's just a hi-hat that I switched out later.
That's
but,
all.
Yes, I liked how this hi-hat sounded, and so switched that out. And so that's just, so you have these layers with the kick
So
and that hi-hat.
So
Pretty simple
these,
stuff.
tell us more about like just wanting to get your ideas out there
Mm-hmm.
and just getting the process going as quickly as possible. I know personally for me, I can get so caught up in like making sure that everything sounds right, is EQ'd properly, is
Yeah.
compressed. You know, I'm more so mixing as I go, whereas that can be like creatively kind of draining at some point.
Mm-hmm.
But you seem to really hop into things and just try to get as much out there as possible. Do you have any tips or tricks to the young kids about how to really like just keep things moving forward creatively right off the bat?
Yeah. I think the mixing as you go thing is something everybody kind of does. I still, I definitely get caught up in that myself, but I think one thing that's been really helpful for me is trying to get a basic structure to the song laid out from the very beginning. And sometimes I'll force myself even to start like, okay, I need the kick drum here, and then
Yeah.
I'm going to have it cut out here, and lay out the kick drum for the entire track, and
Yeah.
then lay out my hi-hats for the entire track. And the sooner you can get all of those things out, the better.
Yeah.
I still, my default, channel setup, I still have like an EQ and everything in there
Yeah.
like that. And so I'll take out, the low end on a clap or something like
Right.
that as I go along. And I definitely do mix as I go along, but it's tricky not to get caught up in, like you were saying, into trying to just make a tiny section sound
Yeah,
perfect.
definitely.
So that's one thing, that's one area where presets or, like this built-in 909 kit really helps, is being able to start on something and just get an idea going really quickly.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's some very solid advice. You just kind of want to get things sequenced
Yes.
in arrangement like as quickly as possible, just trying to keep things going forward.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think like once that's kind of going, you'll notice there's these cut up bits right here on the intro. So there's only 4, including that little click part, but
Yeah.
there's only a few elements on the intro. But these little bits right here are cut up probably from a longer loop. And one way I'll end up working pretty quickly too is saying like, okay, I've got, this kick and a hi-hat. I want some texture to it. I want things to feel like they're pushing forward. So I'll throw, maybe try some different loops on there, and then I'll just cut out parts that I don't need in that loop.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the handiest way you can end up using a lot of those pre-made top loops, is by putting them in there and then just start slicing it up.
Yeah.
And so you'll end up with some little parts like this that don't sound like...
Is there any way we could listen to the original loop before you chop it up?
Let's see if it's... Yeah, it looks like it's...
Cool. Let's just take a listen.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, so it was, kind of a funky little, like, cool top loop. But, that was way too busy for what I was trying to do for this song. But I liked, some of the kind of, like, offbeat hits, and I liked the crunchy tone of everything. So I took out those little parts that I wanted, and then when you hear it layered with the rest...
Yeah, let's... Cool, man.
And so it's just something, those little kind of ghost note hits are something that's really subtle and small, but for this style of music, I think it's super important to feel like you're having a beat that's driving forward, and having those kind of little ghost notes in there make it feel like it's pushing forward a bit, if that makes any sense, rather than just, you know, a kick, snare, kick, snare.
Yeah, do you feel like those ghost notes are kind of what differentiates like a beat that might not have that much character to something that like is filled with a little bit more life, or is it just kind of how you use those things?
Yeah, I think it definitely adds more life, and from the stuff that I really got into that really made me get into like making this kind of music, like, you know, Claude Von Stroke or Shiba-san or anything like that, from listening to that stuff so much, you get to really hear that it relies a ton on just those ghost notes to kind of make the drums funkier sounding.
Yeah, very cool.
And it's super important in the way that those notes interact with the bass that we'll get into later on. But yeah, it's in almost every track I do, it'll usually have kind of like little stuttery things like that. And that's usually how I make them, is I make a pretty straightforward beat. You know, it's always 4/4 stuff, or almost always 4/4 stuff, and then just start filling in the gaps in that 4/4 beat with some little ghost notes, but trying not to overdo it.
Right.
Yeah.
So these ghost notes, for the most part, are hitting on like the kick or the snare.
So yeah, except for these right here, that's, let's see, it's hitting on like the 7th.
Okay. Just like a little lead in before.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It's it's hitting on the 4th beat of the 2nd bar here on those ones. And I think there's some other layers that come in later on to kind of add more complexity to that and everything too.
Yeah, let's take a listen, keep moving forward here.
Yeah, let's see here. So the intro goes on like that a little bit, and then there's another hat loop that gets added on there that's pretty simple on its own. But let's just take the drums by themselves. So when it gets to this part.
What about that kind of blippy sounding?
Yeah, that's a loop that I remember I ended up finding just some top loop or something that I cut up and kind of changed the pitch on some sections and then smashed it back together, joined them again, and that's just an old, I even labeled it here, it's just a conga drum from an 808 machine.
Wow.
And so that's one of the things too, like, aside, I think there's a lot of people that kind of will write off, you know, top loops or these long loops or anything like that. But there's a number of different ways you can use them that are really, really helpful and doesn't have to sound like you just snagged it from a sample pack or whatever. You can go through, like I did before, cut out the little parts that I wanted to kind of fill in gaps in my beat. Or, in this one, I really liked how those conga samples sounded, but I didn't like what it was playing originally. So what I did was, in Ableton, I just went in and started slicing up some of the individual hits and then pitching them differently and then joining it back together again. And it's a really effective way to just use audio to get something that's original still, but uses this really cool sound that you're working with.
Definitely. I think a lot of people are trying to stay away from that because they think it might be a cop-out, you know, it might be like a cheap thing to do. Yeah. And I don't think to any extent it is. Like, there is a point where you're a young producer and you're still figuring out how to piece things together. And I remember, you know, like almost feeling guilty that I was just taking different samples, but that's just one step in like many that you take to eventually start creating your own samples, to eventually do your own mix, do your own mastering. That's a message to the kids, you know. Just have fun.
It's another part of just trying to work as quickly as possible too, to get your ideas out. And I mean, it sounds a little silly, but if you if you really think about it, I have, an electric piano or other instruments sitting over here. And at some point, there isn't really a difference between playing something on an instrument and then, or instead just taking a loop, cutting things up, repitching things to different notes.
Definitely.
You're all just taking a sound and organizing it in a different way. And so long as you're doing something that fits with the idea that you have in your head and conveys it as effectively as possible, then I think that's great. Like, you'll see it's all about just conveying it as effectively as possible. So there's some things that I program in the MIDI notes myself, because that's easier to get the sound I wanted. There's some things where I chop up the audio and then join it again. That's easier to get the sound. There's some down here where it's just chopped up audio.
The last thing I wanted to ask about your drums, especially because you're using some samples, some loops, some MIDI, some hits. How are you ensuring that they're all like sticking together, that they all kind of fit in the mix in the right way?
Yeah. So let's see what bus. I mean, I'll always have the kick on its own bus. And it looks like on this song, I ran the kick through FabFilter Saturn a little bit, which is a saturator, but it's a multi-band saturator. It's really cool, where you can choose different parts of the audio spectrum to add different levels of saturation to. So
let's take a look at what that looks like.
So it looks like I hardly did anything to the kick. I just did a tiny bit of saturation on the low end here, below 120. I don't know. I couldn't tell you exactly why I did that, but it must have sounded right to me at the time. And then on the drum bus, I always run them together. And on this song, the entire drum bus is sidechained to the kick, which I'll do that sometimes, and it's probably not necessary for all styles of music, but for kind of techie stuff where it's really choppy sounding, it can really help when you have a short kick and the drums are just trading off their sound with the kick, which is what the sidechaining's doing. It's turning down the volume on the drums when the kick is hitting a little bit, and then it's bringing it back up. So it gives it a little bit of a pulsing sort of sound.
And is that why you have your drums in a separate channel with a separate bus to the other drums? Yeah,
absolutely. And it's let's see here. I mean, sometimes you'll use a compressor on the whole drum bus or something like that. It just depends, but it's really handy to be able to process them on their own separately from everything else. And so still then on each drum channel, though, there's always an EQ and probably some kind of compression on each one. There's some side chaining on individual hits here too. And if I made the song today, I would probably do it a little differently, but the general idea here is that even though there's a lot going on with the percussion, you don't want multiple elements of percussion hitting on top of each other.
Yeah.
Because you can have that, but they should be in different parts of the spectrum, or else you end up with phasing issues where audio signals are canceling each other out, and it turns into a nightmare when you get to mixing and mastering, which I should remind myself sometimes, because I still have tracks that are just awful when it comes to mixing and mastering, because it's hitting on top of each other.
And so when you say percussion, you're talking less about like hats, kick, snare, more so about sounds that might have a tone. Like what are you listening for to know in advance that this is probably not going to sit in the mix too well, or not going to get mixed or mastered too well?
Well, one thing, you get better about just having a sense where different elements are going to fall within the spectrum. But so on this, for example, here's a little hat loop here.
Yeah.
And I ran that EQ is super high, and it'd be odd to high pass it that high on its own, but
I love that. Dirty beat.
I think because there was so much going on in the kind of mid-high, like this stuff, you know, let's see where that's sitting. This stuff is, yeah, this stuff was hitting, you know, a lot from 150 to 1,000 or so.
Yeah.
And so I was trying to have things not clash with each other too much. And so sometimes you take care of that with the samples you choose, and sometimes you take care of it, you know, just with EQ or sidechaining or anything like that.
Right.
But yeah, you're absolutely right. I don't think of it so much in terms of snare or hi-hat or anything. I think of it in terms of tone and
Okay.
where these different elements are falling in the spectrum.
Cool.
Yeah. So,
Cool. Let's move forward. There's one thing I really want to get to, and it's this really trippy sound that I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. It was, I think it was either in the FX column, but it just was that piece right there.
Oh.
Yeah.
So let's see. I'll play this for a minute here
Yeah,
so
let's
we can
just
see.
listen for a bit, and I'll see when that
I'm
comes
the
in.
booty killer. I'm the 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 booty killer.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what that I think when I was laying out the song structurally, I knew I generally wanted you know, kind of build and a lead up to the thicker bass coming in and the main vocal part coming in. But I like this idea of having kind of a post drop section, like a bridge after the main bass part comes in, because
Okay.
you'll hear a lot of songs that are pretty simple where it's, you know, intro and then breakdown and build up and drop section and then a bridge in the middle,
Yeah.
and that's fine and it works for a lot of songs. But it's cool when you can draw out that main bass part a little longer by adding some different elements that are unexpected.
Yeah.
And that's what I was trying to kind of do there. And that honestly just came from, I think just, I had a bunch of like effects hits from weird old like analog
Yeah.
synths. And I really like working in audio, you know, like chopping up audio and pitching things differently. And what I ended up doing is just taking these old analog hits from old synths and then pitching some of them differently, like adding pitch bends, resampling it, reversing some of them. You can see there's some parts that are reversed here. And so let's... So it really was just, again, kind of like we talked about earlier, where that section with the ghost notes or whatever up there, it's doing something similar but with a synth.
Right.
And most of the time when I use a synth in my music, I'll try to use it in a very rhythmic sort of way. And that's kind of what I was trying to accomplish with that. So it's really not, there's no like magic or anything to like what was played in there. It was mostly just laying stuff out in a rhythm I wanted and then messing with pitch bend and audio and resampling it. So yeah, so we can see on this part, for example, that's just a pitch bend on that part.
That's the what's the yeah sample? Is that this?
Yeah, that's just looks like something. Yeah, it was just something
crazy,
random, and so those, you know, when you get to collect a lot of sample packs and everything like that, and it's sometimes fun to just like I'll set stuff aside when I hear some cool little thing in sample pack. I'll put it in a different folder so that I can find it later, and then I might just throw it in a song and see if it works.
Yeah.
Because you spend all these hours going through all these hundreds of samples and
Right. You
maybe
just start to build out
Yeah.
the catalog.
something might sound cool but not be good for the song you're working in now. So
Yeah.
that's honestly probably what that sort of thing was. And so I just kind of started throwing things in there and pitching them differently, reversing things. And then it came out like rhythmically pretty cool. And every single person who hears the song now has always asked me if I had sampled R2D2 from
Okay.
Star Wars, because it sounds like the way he talks and
Yeah.
everything in the movie. But no, it was really just like I explained, but just don't be afraid to have fun and mess with stuff and
what
try
about the
pitch
tuning?
bending.
What about the tuning? Is that not something you were concerned about? Either it clashing with other parts of the song or it not even being the key of the
Mhm.
song?
So
It sits so well. you know,
yeah,
it fits.
I think I probably did check the tuning on that. It's a lot like the samples, it doesn't matter or anything, but the pitch bend, it does matter a bit. I'll check the tuning. I have this electric piano sitting next to me here, and I'll see kind of like what the sample is hitting on
Yeah.
and try to make that stick within the same realm.
Are you
But
just tuning it by ear, or do you have some crazy software you're using?
no, just by ear. I played guitar forever, and
Yeah.
so that kind of thing is pretty intuitive to me. But Ableton, I think starting in 9.5, has a built-in tuner too, which you can use as well, which
Okay.
I've definitely used before and really comes in handy
Right.
for some things. But honestly, sometimes it just works to throw things in there and see if it sounds good or if it doesn't.
Yeah.
And sometimes down the line you need to change the tuning on it anyway, which I've done. But I think at this point I was more concerned just about how it laid out rhythmically
Yeah.
and everything like that.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's that kind of section. The bass line in the song is...
Yeah, let's talk about the bass line.
Yeah, it's super simple.
What did you use to make the bass line?
So the bass line, I used Trillion, which is pretty awesome if you're looking to get kind of analog sounds. Like it's
Yeah.
really strong sounding analog stuff. And I think it's just a regular Trillion preset in here.
So is that mimicked off of like an older?
Yeah,
Juno or something.
Juno 106,
Yeah.
yeah. And so, yeah, you can hear it has that transient at the beginning where it's like a clicky
Yeah.
punch on there, but I almost wanted something that was, I guess, almost sort of dubby sounding or something like that. Just this ringing bass line in the song. And it's kind of a cool trick where the bass line on the little breakdown here is an octave higher. So, it kind of introduces you to the bass line and everything, and it looks like I just automated the resonance a little bit. And so then it just...
kick to another one.
Yeah, then it just it drops down an octave when it hits the chorus, and it's super simple, but it's stuff like that does the trick. Like you're just, the entire thing is just trying to build tension and then having some release for that tension.
Yeah.
And so while there's no real bass. Yeah. The kick drum isn't on this part. There's no real deep bass or anything like that on this part. It's just kind of, some effects builds and everything like that. There's a microwave beep in here. So, just some effects and stuff as it's building up. Yeah. But then super simple but effective, where it just drops down an octave when it goes into the chorus. So, I mean, there's not a ton to the bass line itself.
What about do you have this whole crazy effect chain with the bass line? Do you want to quickly just shoot through and say what each one is doing and why you put it there?
Yeah. So I wanted, let me see here. Let me see if, before I start just saying crazy things. Okay. Yeah, I mean, it looks like I laid out the high octave bass line and the lower octave bass line on separate things here. And I honestly think I just did that because I wanted to automate some effects differently, and it was easier at the time. It doesn't look like I did too much differently in terms of any of the effects themselves. Let me see here. Yeah, there's a little bit of compression on the top one, but so the effects going through them anyway. There's just some simple EQ dropping off stuff below 30 that you wouldn't hear anyway. There's a dip in the EQ around, 140 or so, because that's an area where, depending on how your kick is hitting and everything else is hitting, it can get a little muddy sounding in that region, and it's one region to look for if you have a muddy sounding track.
Right. Specifically within the bass?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. Within the bass. And then there's Little Radiator, which I am a huge fan of. I love All Sound Toys stuff. It's just a saturation plugin, but a really analog sounding saturation plugin.
Yeah.
And what that does, let's see if we can hear it on the bass here. So here's with it on, and then with it off.
Pretty subtle.
It's pretty subtle, but what adding saturation, really subtle saturation like that does to your bass is it will bring out some of the higher harmonics in the bass, which is really important to be able to hear it on all kinds of systems. So a lot of basses will just sit, really far in the low end, and this one probably does anyway. Let's see if we can see anything visually here.
Did you don't have any sub bass that you layered on with that? It's
No.
all just coming from the one VST.
Yeah, that's all just coming from the one, because you can see it's hitting, like, it's going down to
it definitely
really
has
low
that
here.
sub.
And so, yeah, that EQ is before that anyway. Let's see.
And the compressor, it looks like that's the sidechain one that's sidechain to your kick again, right?
Yes, it is.
And that's also compressing as a compression does.
No, it's just sidechain.
Do you have a compressor on there?
On this, yeah. There's a compressor on the bus. It's not working. It's not working that hard. Yeah, I guess the threshold is set up pretty high here, though. The thing is with the bass on this song is that it's kind of a ringing sub bass the whole time, and so there's not a lot of dynamics in the sub bass, and so it makes it so you don't. If there's not a lot of dynamics, you aren't going to need to worry about compression as much.
Right.
You'll still have to, and there was. When it came to mastering and everything like that, there was a lot of compression that had to go on the low end.
Right.
Because you do want the low end to be this really sort of tight unit, especially if you're making stuff that you want to get played in clubs, which is what most of my music is aimed towards. And so that was actually a big lesson going back and forth on figuring out the master that we wanted to go with on this track, was that I don't think I even realized at that point just how tight the low end compression had to be on the track.
In
And-
order for it to have that club sound to it.
Yes. And you get a better sense of it. These days, I have a better sense of how the compression needs to be on the low end.
Yeah.
But the problem is if you get... Well, there's a couple problems if the low end is really kind of loose sounding. If it is, it's going to be hard to get the track as loud as you need it to be because the low end takes up the most audio bandwidth and it's going to be fluctuating a lot. And
Right.
so what that means is that your whole track is going to be quieter than other tracks because it's using more information basically to compensate for that low end, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, definitely.
And the other problem is it's just not going to sound strong on a big system if your low end has a ton of loose dynamics.
Right, if it's
in
not
it.
very tight.
Yeah, exactly. It'll sound boomy,
Yeah.
and you might not hear the nuances of the mid-range or top end. You might
Yeah.
not hear the vocals. It'll just sound really boomy. And
So what are you doing to help out with that, and what
Mhm.
advice do you have for people that want to make sure their work is going to sound decent on a club system,
yeah.
especially with
Uh,
the low end?
Well, I think there could have been probably more work put into this pre-mastering even on getting that low end tuned in, but honestly I think a lot of it is just getting a sense of hearing how an intuition to know where the low end needs to be hitting. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not a very simple answer, but one thing I can say that's really cool to do, and you do this more in the mastering phase, but you can grab this plugin called Voxingo Span, which is a free plugin, and I just threw this on my bass here, and so it's going pretty slow because we're recording stuff and everything right now, but you can see there's not a lot of dynamics in what the bass is doing there. You'd normally see bass moving up and down like that more. Like if we put that on the kick, it would be moving up and down a lot more or if we put it on the master. But one really handy thing to do with that when you're getting your final mix or master is throw Voxingo Span on the master track on your track and then open a reference track and throw a copy of Span on there as well.
Interesting. So you can compare the actual
Yes.
spectrum.
Yes, and so let's look at this for a minute here. I'll put this on the master.
I'm the Booty Killa. I'm the Booty Killa.
And so you can see how you'll be able to see how things are hitting in here. And then you'll be able to compare how it looks on,
Whatever track.
Yeah, exactly. A track that you want yours to sound like. And you'll get an idea also not only of how the spectrum is shaped, but how much the low end is moving on the track that you're trying to sound like.
Yeah.
And if the low end on your track is moving all over the place and the low end on the other track is staying pretty steady, that means you've got to work with figuring out whether you need to compress some stuff more or somehow control the dynamics. It's maybe sidechain or something like that. But you'll get a much better sense of how much your low end has to move, and when you see it moving less, that means it's more controlled, which means it'll come out to a better master, it'll be louder and more clear and everything like that.
Honestly, man, I think that is some advice I've never heard before. I think that is a perfect place to end things.
Sure.
This has been really awesome. I think hopefully in the future we'll do this again. Why not?
Yes, sounds good to
Awesome.
me.
My name's Rob from Dubseed.com. I'm here with my friend Alex, Bacosaurus. You got a show coming up in Alaska pretty soon here,
I
but
do.
we're going to link all your music, all upcoming shows, everything like that in the description below. This has been another episode of Beatroots. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week.
Peace.